Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships, and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week, a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help others find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. Today in the theater, my guest is Mimi Mungomba. Mimi is a therapist here in Nashville who specializes in working with couples and with people who have experienced trauma. She uses a type of therapy called EMDR, which you'll hear more about in the episode. She brought with her 2016's Lion. Lion, according to IMDb, is about a 5-year-old Indian boy who gets lost on the streets of Calcutta, thousands of kilometers from his home. He survives many challenges before being adopted by a couple in Australia. 25 years later, he sets out to find his lost family. You know, Lion was a movie that I had never heard of before preparing for this episode, so I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't either. But I want to say this, it is a powerful movie that deeply affected me. If you want to watch it before listening to today's episode, I don't blame you. Or if you want to watch it after you listen, do that. But either way, you must see this movie. Okay, I'd better start the show or I'll end up crying all over again. Let's dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Mimi!
Hi.
Welcome to the theater.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on today. I am so excited to finally meet you because I feel like I know so many people who know you.
Yeah.
And I've just never had the chance yet. And I've heard so much about you. And everybody that I know just says such great things about you. So just to have you in and
Thank
have you
you.
be a
That's
guest
so
is
kind.
just such an honor.
I've heard a lot about you too.
Oh.
From people who've been on your podcast.
Oh.
And yeah. So I'm grateful to be here.
Oh, man. Well, I like to start out every episode with asking my guests, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, therapy was never in the cards. I never thought about it as a kid. I didn't, know what therapy was. I really dreamed about a life that was really stable and predictable. And there's nothing about being a therapist that is like that, as you probably know.
I feel like it can be stable. I don't know, predictable is out the window.
Totally.
But I don't know, as we grow and we get better boundaries and we can make it as stable as we need it to be.
Yeah, I think maybe sterile is a better word.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of grew up in a bit of a chaotic family situation, and so as an adult, I dreamed about sort of going to the same job in the same really sterile, kind of predictable, controlled environment. And yeah, so therapy was obviously not on the list. And then when I was 14, I had my first experience in therapy. And I think that was my first little, I guess a seed planted of there's these people in the world who will sit with you while you're going through hard things. But again,
before you went, did you have any kind of concept at all of what a therapist was or what they did?
No.
Be it from pop culture, like a movie or a TV show or...
No. So I spent the first 12 years of my life in Zambia. And so, yeah, I'm sure there are therapists there, but it's definitely not as...
prevalent.
Prevalent as it is here or even in kind of European countries. And I think definitely maybe the United States is the most therapist saturated place or one of. but I had no exposure even on television or pop culture around what a therapist or counselor is growing up. And so I honestly didn't know that existed until...
So as a 14-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious how it was positioned to you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to go meet a stranger
Yeah.
and you're going to talk to him.
Yeah. So a little, like, I guess, backstory. So at 14, I was placed in foster care. And so it wasn't really a choice that I had. It was more like, you have to do this. Like, you're going to therapy. And that's kind of part of that process as I was with this new family. And so I don't know how they got me to go there, but I went, and the first few sessions, you know, just stared at this older white lady sitting across from me, like, yes, you know, and privacy kind of like culturally for me, like as someone growing up in, yeah, like a completely different cultural context, like you just don't sit across from a stranger and
spill your guts.
Yeah, like pour your whole life out to them. And so it took a while for me to understand that that was a private, safe environment and that there was permission to talk about the hard things that were happening. But yeah, it was definitely foreign as a concept for me at 14. But yeah, like that was my kind of first therapy experience. You know, went on to college, kind of in the medical mindset, thinking, okay, I want to work in a lab somewhere. I want to do research about autism. That was my dream.
Where did that passion?
Yeah, so my adoptive family, my mom's a pediatric speech therapist or speech pathologist. And so I would work summer camps at her therapy clinic. And so a lot of her clients had autism or were on the autism spectrum. And so I just was so fascinated by what is this? Like, you know, yeah, like what are the things that play into this developing, precursors, all of that. And so really like intrigued this kind of research mind for me.
My little brother has autism, so it's always like going through grad school. If they said, hey, you can pick the topic of this project,
that was where
it was either
gravitated.
autism or it was addiction for me.
Okay.
And my joke was always like, yeah, that's going to be my population, is those two circles overlapping.
Yeah.
I can't think of a tougher one, but
That would be so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has it been?
No, I mean, it's been addiction.
Okay.
But I continue to read as much as I can about autism too. And
yeah,
I even have toyed around with like my PhD thesis.
Okay. Being around
on helping develop a program for families to deal with the challenges that come with a loved one with developmental.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So anytime anybody says autism, I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah.
How did you,
Yeah, so that was always kind of in my periphery, I guess. And then I went to Vanderbilt here, and I had to take a psych class to fulfill something. So I took, like the very first basic, very general psychology course. And then sitting there was just this feeling of like, wait, what is this? What's this world? What are these questions? I think put language to a lot of like my experience that I didn't know how to vocalize, and still answered to that kind of research-minded part of me that like just enjoys asking questions about people and what makes the human experience unique and all of these things. And so switched my degree to psychology after that first class. Still thinking...
One class did it for you? Wow.
One class. I was
all
done.
right.
Yeah. But still thinking research, like research. Worked in a schizophrenia research lab during my time at Vanderbilt. Loved that. Loved asking questions about it. So yeah, that was my path. And then graduated and was sort of like, okay, so what job can you do with a bachelor's in psychology? And the answer is not much.
Nothing.
Like no jobs.
I feel like, it's been one of my jokes, but I feel like in undergrad, there's a couple of like catch-all degrees. And it's like psych political science, communications,
Yes.
where it's really, you're just pouring a foundation.
Right.
Like, you're going to have to get something.
You have to do something
beyond
else.
that.
And
yeah.
the options are so extensive that it's not this clear cut pathway. And so, yeah, I felt that. I was a part-time nanny for a while, just trying to figure out what am I going to do, and then got a job at an agency in town doing case management. And then as a case manager there, you're paired with a therapist or a couple of therapists, and the therapist is seeing the kids that are on your caseload. And so, yeah, that was, again, another like reintroduction to seeing therapists be therapists. And one was a marriage and family therapist, and one was an LPC. And even that for me, and I also worked with an LCSW. And so I kind of got to see this, like, oh, you're all therapists.
You had the whole menu laid out.
It was crazy. Like, I think back on that and think, wow, I think, yeah, like I was supposed to be there kind of sort of to see all the different ways, kind of the way you're taught, the way that information is communicated to you. And so that really informed my next step, kind of watching the three of them and really finding that the more systemic approach really spoke to me, made sense to me, especially working with clients who have such compounded trauma. That systemic approach just fit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I quit that job and applied at Trevecca, and then here we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
And here we are. Does your work currently lean into any particular population or issues?
Yeah. So my practice is probably split pretty evenly between couples in distress and then adult individuals with compounded childhood trauma. And yeah, those are my two loves. The deeper, the darker, the harder, the better. I just enjoy sitting still with people in hard. And being a space for that hard to be okay, especially things that have been hard to say and tough to say throughout life. So yeah, trauma is a pretty big part of the work that I do and enjoy.
Which I feel like, and I've had people ask me about like the work I do, which in a similar way split between couples and men who have sexual addictions.
Okay.
You know, why do you do what you do? Do you enjoy that? I'm like, enjoy is not,
Such a weird word.
It is, I would say it's more like I can connect with them.
Yeah.
I feel passionate to help them. I feel fulfilled, and I get to celebrate their victories. So it's not like I enjoy going to a football game or something that's like, you know, you skip home after
like,
a particularly but it's more just like I have the ability to sit with them in that, and I recognize how important it is, and I have knowledge that can help,
that can
and
offer. Yeah.
So enjoy is always like
It's a tough word, but I mean, I think it is really fulfilling work, you know, but it's not always light in the same way, like you're saying a football game would maybe be.
And I even tell clients, you know, in trying to describe our goal is for every session to be therapeutic, I tend to use the word productive rather than a good or a bad session.
Yeah.
Because there's some that are really productive that you walk out and you want to high five somebody.
Right.
You're like, yes, I walk out feeling great and I'm motivated and I'm good. And there's some you walk out feeling like you've been to war.
Right.
And both can be productive and help a ton.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to even position it like enjoyable or good,
or like a good session or
just what helps.
Right.
And sometimes helping is the hard work.
Right. Yeah. I fully agree with that. I think I tell clients that even those sessions that feel like you just were in, you know, a boxing ring are kind of in the trajectory of forward movement. But yeah, like I'm a big believer that sometimes the way forward is like through and
I said something like that. Yes, I said something like that to a client a couple of weeks ago. I said, you know, a lot of people talk about getting over stuff, but let's look at a mountain I said, a lot of times it's not about getting over, it's about getting through. And getting through a mountain is so much tougher than getting over it. But it's by the tough work that you grow.
Right.
And that's what we got to do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I mean, I think your why therapy kind of gives a clue as to the next question.
Yeah.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I chose Lion.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
And I feel all kinds of ways about it. This movie came out in 2016.
It did.
I think I had the vaguest awareness of this movie, but not from 2016. Like, I feel like maybe I saw a poster or something lately about it.
Okay.
And so when you said this is my movie, I didn't have any kind of framework about what it was about.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I knew Dev Patel from Slumdog Millionaire.
Right.
And from The Last Airbender, which was terrible.
That was so bad.
But yeah, and I had watched the cartoon and loved it.
Me
and then
too.
to see that movie was like, oh no, you didn't get this at all. So I mean, whenever I read your email saying like this is the movie I want, I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like rent it and all that. And then I don't think I even watched the trailer.
So like no warning.
Yeah, and so yesterday Leigh-Ann got home, and as she was like, I don't know, we were I think maybe like feeding the dog or something. I pulled up the trailer on my phone and we watched the trailer, and I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do now. But it was another, I've said this a few times on the past couple episodes, it was another one where we started it a little late.
Yeah.
And so because of her commute, we were just like, all right, you're going to watch it later. I'll watch it tomorrow morning. So I got up early this morning to watch it. And I said something on Instagram and you replied to it this morning, but like uncontrollable sobbing.
Yeah.
Ugly crying, like shaking, watching this movie.
Me too.
And I do not normally say this on episodes anymore, but like, let me say, listeners right now, if you have not seen this movie and you're listening to this episode, just hit pause, go watch the movie, unpause, because like we're going to spoil the heck out of it.
Yeah.
And it is really one where it's just so powerful.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to pollute your experience.
Right. Like it's important
watching
to just
it.
see it.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily that there's some kind of weird twist or something, but it's so powerful and good. Do yourself a favor, pause, pull up iTunes, rent it, watch it, unpause when you're done, and go from there.
I agree.
So why did you pick the movie?
Yeah. So when I first heard about this movie coming out, I love Dev Patel. Like, I think he's an amazing actor, and he's like so attractive too. But the storyline really stood out to me, and so I remember seeing trailers. I remember how well it did.
Had you known about the story? Because I finished the movie, got on Libby, and found the audiobook that the guy wrote. Have already checked it out. So that's my commute book later on today.
Okay. No,
did you know about that ahead of time?
I didn't. No. So I'd never heard this story before. And so, yeah, I'm kind of a stickler about reading the book before I see the movie. And so I was kind of torn when it first came out. And so I read the book first. And yeah, like it just really spoke to me. And then I didn't see the movie until a year later because I was actually afraid to see it because I knew like, okay, there's going to be themes here that are going to touch really personal places in me, and knew I could not watch it on my own either. So finally watched it with a friend.
And you couldn't have told me.
I know. When I saw your post, I was like, oh, should have warned him about that. Yeah, so I chose it because I think it does such a good job exploring a few things that are important to me. So just the sacredness and importance of human connection. I think that is something that in this movie is just portrayed in such a poignant way. but then also speaks so much about trauma. And also, I think the main character, Sharu's going home in a way kind of to me says something about the process of therapy, in that sometimes we have to go backwards into hard, scary, unknown things that maybe we spent a long time just trying to outrun and get away from, forget, push down, in order for us to live like a fuller life. And just seeing like how that, his past, his childhood, his home was continuing to call out to him, in spite of his kind of, like good life, right? Like he was doing well. Like
it wasn't like in his adoptive family, his needs weren't quote unquote getting met.
Right.
His adoptive parents were very caring.
Right. Loved him.
Yeah.
You know, he had what he needed, was doing well in school. Like he seemed to have like a personal life that was flourishing. And yet, you know, I think when we have things that have been there and are there, like there comes a point where,
especially traumatizing things.
Right. There's, like I think going into them and returning to them is really important. So, yeah.
So, I mean, kind of hearing your why you chose the movie, I think, gosh, I think I just want to give space to what is it about this movie in particular, things that stuck out to you. I think I'm even just recognizing now who I am. I don't know if there's anything I could add other than just being curious. And so, I mean, tell me more, I guess.
Yeah.
Like is there anything in particular in the movie, scenes, themes that stick out that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, a few, I think that watching this movie, it's really easy to look at Sharu's life as baby him, 5 years old or however old he is in the beginning.
He was the tiniest child.
Like,
and so I mean, for such a tiny kid, he talked so big.
Yes. Yeah. Like so tough. Like
I can lift anything.
I could do anything, you know? Like he really, like was big even in this like tiny body and even in the midst of a hard life, or like from this end, you know, being here in our life, kind of looking at that, thinking like, oh, that kid has such a hard life, you know, like kind of scrapping and scraping just for food and milk and all of this. And yet, like, seeing the joy in his life and seeing the power of connection, I think, is what stood out to me in those beginning scenes. I didn't have a sense of feeling like, oh, like, poor him. I just saw this, like, bond between brothers that, like, bolsters you through hard things, you know? And I think as a therapist, when I'm with clients who are in the middle of hard and they have that connectedness, it makes a huge difference. Like weathering hard, feeling connected is completely different than when hard comes and then you also find yourself without those safe connections. And I think in his life, you know, when it transitions to him finding himself alone in the on the train station, I think to me, it's not just the event that's traumatic. It's that now also he's in hard again, but all the safe supports, safe attachment figures are also ripped away from him. And that to me is a clear picture of like what compounds trauma and the role that attachment plays in, like what trauma is and what compounded trauma really is. And so that stood out to me. And so many moments, like even when he's wandering around and he's in the subway station and the other kids are like sleeping in a group, you know, and he's on his own on the outskirts and one of the boys
pushes the cardboard thing.
I mean, that to me just says like, man, like there is something about the need to connect, like to have connection, even in the midst of.
Which at that point, he had gotten off the train, so I'm imagining that those children probably spoke Bengali and he was speaking Hindi, so they couldn't even really
Like
speak to each
connect.
other.
Right.
But there was that basic element
Right.
of, I see you,
Right.
come with us.
Come be near us, come be
Yeah.
close to us. And yeah, like moments like that really stood out to me. Or, when he's outside the restaurant mimicking the man eating, right? There's no language there, but it's like being a part of something, like just pretending to be. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do, and I did not even think about that during that
just like,
scene.
whoa.
I just thought it was like he was not mocking the man, but playing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, and it is, and obviously like being a therapist, I think we like can see things that maybe aren't intended to be seen, but as I watched him, it just said to me like something of the desperation to just like have human contact, to feel part of the world, in a way that, yeah, like he grew up being so much a part of something, even though life was really difficult.
Even in the difficulty, always, always, always being with his family.
Right.
Always, like probably literally always with his brother.
At all times. Mm-hmm.
But with his mom, his little sister,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden he's not apart.
Like to have that completely ripped away, and for at that age, just imagining like the shock to your system, of finding yourself completely alone in the world. And that stood out to me more than his, digging for food or whatever. Like that's the part that for me was like, whoa, like he is suddenly alone in the midst of this. And just thinking about the impact long term of that, which we see, as the movie progresses, that never leaves you, that kind of attachment.
Even when you don't know it's there.
Exactly, which is the crazy part, Yeah, I was reminded of, trainer Deb Kennard, who trained me for EMDR, saying trauma has symptoms, not memories, and so even though that wasn't in his like conscious awareness, maybe your body knows that happened, that there's this story back there that maybe has been insulated by like, okay, things are okay now, I'm in a better environment kind of physically and all these things. And yet as soon as he like is invited into a world that reminds him in this sensory way, it's like it all is here now.
Yeah. You mentioned EMDR. I always want to be cognizant of, like, I mean, the show is geared not towards therapists, but towards people who maybe just have an interest in improving their relationships or in connecting with mental health. Can you speak just a little bit about what EMDR is?
Sure.
Because I can never remember what the D and the
acronym
R mean.
Things.
Yeah.
I know. I'm going to try to get it right here. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is what the acronym stands for. So, that is just a really well-researched, well-studied modality for working with trauma. And a huge part of that modality is that we all have trauma, right? Like whether it's big T, little t. So, I think in the world we understand trauma sometimes to be these really huge events or abuse or only these things that stand out to us like, oh, like a natural disaster. But kind of understanding that we all have trauma in some way, shape, or form. And so this modality kind of traces back using present life, so the symptoms again, right, that we see that maybe are connected to unprocessed or unexplored trauma, so uses those present symptoms and then kind of goes backwards into like, where did these beliefs, symptoms, where are they coming from, what are they fueled by? And that usually brings to light some young experiences that were foundational in how we're experiencing the world now. And so I love this model. I use it a lot with my clients, and also do that kind of with an attachment framework in mind, which I think I carry into all my work, and really just understanding that, yes, events are traumatic, but then when attachment breaches happen, or we're alone, or no one responds to us in the middle of hard events, that is truly, in my mind, what makes trauma.
Yeah, and I even was explaining to a client the other day about attachment injuries and how there are such things as hurts in relationships,
Yeah.
but attachment injuries are more severe in that they cause us to question in this primary attachment relationship, can I receive comfort from this person? Can I depend on them? Are they my safe harbor? And that type of injury kind of hits pause on a relationship.
Yeah.
And even though time may progress,
Right.
the relationship can't until we come back, circle
Like
back,
that
repair
place.
that injury,
Right.
and then we're able to move forward.
Yeah.
So in light of what you're saying, I could definitely see how attachment injuries would be traumatic.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's a severing of that attachment.
Connection, safety.
Yeah, that connection.
Yeah. Right.
So EMDR, if I'm hearing you say, is, I would have called it an intervention, but I'm hearing you say modality. So it is a way of helping a person process through and deal with their trauma.
Yeah, I think there can be some kind of probably like confusion, disagreement about that. I don't see EMDR as an intervention. I really think it is a modality in the same way that EFT or any other is. I think I like use it with kind of an undercurrent of attachment, as I'm saying. But I think when I use EMDR, I don't just kind of insert it into different places. But even when maybe we're not using the tappers or, bilateral stimulation, which is part of it, I think I'm still always doing EMDR, sort of keeping in mind as I'm with the person how what they're telling me, whether we're doing reprocessing or not, fits into kind of my framework of understanding what is trauma. How does trauma show up in present life? And so I think that's the confusion. I think EMDR sometimes is understood to be only when the tappers are going. And there's so much kind of around EMDR that, yeah, like it really is more of a framework.
Yeah.
And the bilateral part is just one part of that framework.
Which you said this, but it reminds me a lot of EFT. Like I've been trained in EFT, and I would say that the overwhelming bulk of my client load are individuals. But just because I don't have two people sitting in front of me, I'm still thinking through the lens of that. So that makes perfect sense.
Exactly that. Yeah.
So tell me more about the movie and what stuck out.
Yeah. I think in addition to just seeing kind of the value of human connection, I think again, this movie just like rips me to shreds for sure.
Yeah.
His reunion with his mom and family spoke to me of how like they were both like worlds away and still experiencing this like trauma in different ways, right? In the end credits, it says his mom never moved away, right? Kind of expecting him to, or anticipating he might come home.
She never lost hope.
Yeah. Like she continued to hope for her baby 25 years later.
Even when, and I don't know, it's cloudy now, whether it said this in the end credits or if I read it on the trivia page on IMDb. It said even though people around her were telling her that she was crazy.
Oh, did it say that? Wow.
That she continued
to hope
and persevered.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. To me, I'm like, whoa, like that is what it means to feel connected, that like continuing to hope and to stay put, right? To like stay in the same physical location to make the pathway for her son clear for him. That like accessibility, right? Is that I'm here when you return. Like no matter what the pathway is, how far away you've been, I'll stay here so that you know that like
she was being a safe anchor, a safe harbor, even
safe haven, like
even though he didn't even know
about it. Yeah, right. Which is I think that element of just the power of like love and knowing that like I have a safe place to return to. I think we all long for that. I think, of course, like this story shows that in a really unique way. But that longing to return to what felt safe and to have questions answered and holes plugged, and to feel that kind of wholeness, integration of both parts of who he was, right?
Yeah. When he showed up, or I don't know if it was when he showed up, he was at his origin point, and he called back to his adoptive mother, and he said, "I want to let you know I'm home." And I thought, what an interesting thing to say to your adoptive mother.
Yeah.
I'm home. But I never saw the adoptive parents kind of challenge that idea.
Yeah.
It seemed to me, like you said the word integration, it seemed to me like they were kind of cheering that on as well, and then even celebrated it once it happened and once he found him. And then like in the actual footage happening during the credits, you see that they actually got to
Like
come
went with,
and meet his mother.
Right.
And so when adoptive mom is hugging biological mom, like, oh,
I know. I know. Yeah, it's interesting that with adoptive mom, what was hard for her was being shut out of his process, like losing access to her son, and not that he had this longing or desire to go and find home. I remember in sort of the beginning when he's adopted by this family and they're in the bathtub and he can't understand her at that point, but she's saying, I know it hasn't been easy. You've probably been through a lot. One day you'll tell me all about it. I'll always listen, right? And he couldn't hear that. But for him, like wanting to protect her from his story, his longing, not wanting to hurt, not wanting to be ungrateful.
He said at one point, "I'm sorry that you couldn't have your own kids."
Yes.
And she said, I could have,
right.
but I
chose
wanted you. I wanted you in my life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so, I think just exploring dynamics like that, like this fear sometimes of bringing people in our present life backwards into the hard we've endured and not wanting to seem ungrateful. I think I hear that from clients all the time, right? They have gone through hard things in childhood and we're sitting there doing trauma work, and part of the hesitancy is like, but my life is good now. I should just be grateful. Like,
It's like you don't have the right to feel pain or to hurt.
Right. And seeing him struggle with that, right? And as a result, then making the circle around him smaller and smaller and smaller when these people on the outskirts want, like his mom, his adoptive mom would have invited this journey for him, or even his girlfriend saying, I want to help you, but in that place of feeling burdensome, of feeling not deserving of exploring pain, because you should be grateful, like you're living on an island with like all these resources and all of that. And I think I definitely see that in my clients, that it's so hard sometimes to give yourself permission to go back and to acknowledge pain when you're staring at the life that you have in front of you right now and thinking like, what do I have to feel pain about? And yet, like him, you maybe are going to sleep with your phantom brother right there haunting you, kind of inviting you to like come home, come home and be home and feel what home is and was and what's been lost. So, yeah.
Out of curiosity, adoptive parents, Sue and John, adopt him at a young age, and it seems like not too long after, adopt a second son.
Yeah.
And you see them take him to meet his brother.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon after, you see that the brother has some I don't know if it's developmental delays,
Yeah.
but he starts to self-harm,
Mm-hmm.
and you see that he does not have an as easy of a time
Mm-hmm.
joining with the family
Mm-hmm.
as our main character. Is there anything there that you can speak to? I mean, obviously, both of them have entire backstories
Right.
coming into that scenario where even though they may end up walking through the same door at the airport,
Right.
they had a whole
Or
different
coming from
world.
different worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, as I watched that, it spoke really clearly to how trauma manifests so differently for people. So I don't know if the kind of behaviors that we see in his brother are developmental. I think when I watched it, I kind of saw them through this lens of like the symptoms of trauma. I don't know what he went through or has been through prior to walking out of that airplane into like Australian land, but also seeing that like, you know, Sharu's kind of symptoms were quiet, right? It's this internal turning in, shutting out people, all of these things. And his brother's symptoms felt really external to me, right? Like the self harming, the yelling, the crying, and shutting off in some ways too, like
I think they mentioned
isolating.
drug abuse at one point as
Okay.
well. They said something about he was off on a boat crabbing
Okay.
and something was happening, and then his mom said something about so he'll get back on the hard stuff when he
Okay.
lands.
That.
And then that was when Sharu
like goes.
even said something along the lines of, I hate what he does
Has
to
done
you.
to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, and I think it speaks to sort of this idea of like symptom bearer and like all of this too, just like the dynamics of that family of like these two kids, and that could happen whether they're adopted or not, right? But seeing how traumatic experiences, which assuming they had really different ones, play out really differently in present life in the way you cope with that, right? So kind of seeing Sharu kind of like trying to outrun it and maybe like numb kind of some of the quiet all that kind of trauma that he's been through. And then his brother, even into adulthood, haunted too, I'm sure, by things that he's experienced, but maybe trying to outrun those in really physical ways like drugs or self-harm and things like that. But I definitely see two manifestations of like, man, like clear pictures of things that have happened and they've experienced in like the first parts of their lives and stories.
I even kind of wondered, which I mean, like I said, they may have walked through the same door at the airport, but their worlds before that could have been so far
So
apart.
different, yeah.
So I think I kind of wondered, I wonder why Sharu didn't seemingly empathize and identify with his adoptive brother more, because it seemed like he almost positioned himself as a, why are you so different? Why are you choosing to act this way? Can't you just get it together and be more apart?
Right.
Whereas they both were adopted.
Like had really hard things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered a little just about, so it seemed like Sharu was with that family for like a year before adoptive brother comes in, right? And so, and at first he can't communicate, but then they show us like pieces of this year where he's really connected with mom and dad, and like he's the center of their world, and they're on the beach playing cricket, and then here comes adoptive brother, right? And you're saying, there's overlaps with their story, but part of him showing up in their home is these scenes where mom and dad's attention is fully on adoptive brother, and here's Sharu in the corner just watching it play out. And so again, like that's a shift in this like accessibility to connection, and part of that adult, I hate what he's done to you, and I wonder about if that played into the way he was or wasn't able to relate to.
That makes sense, because it seemed like with his family of origin, they, from what we saw, just so seamlessly were always all together.
Right.
And there wasn't necessarily mom looking to one more than the other.
Right.
They just
Right.
all kind of flowed.
Right.
And so to experience an interruption of the flow.
Right. Which we all hate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, in school we learn so much about homeostasis, right? And so it's like he kind of finds a new normal, let's say, kind of coming into this home. There's a new normal for a year. And then here comes this stranger into his world, and this stranger's behaviors are so big and external. And so, yeah, like I wonder for this kid who's already had so many like disruptions in like flow, the impact of that. And he definitely does kind of take on this like protector role for mom, and yeah, just a lot of like animosity toward his brother too. Yeah.
Do you know who Hassan Minhaj is?
Yes,
The comedian.
I do.
Have you seen Homecoming King?
No.
It's an hour-long special on Netflix.
Okay.
Can't recommend it enough.
Okay.
It is centered around his experience immigrating
Okay.
to the
I need to
U.S.
watch that.
with his father and mother.
Okay.
And then kind of like what we're saying about a change in homeostasis, like his mom and him and his dad come to the States. Then his mom goes back to India to finish up her medical degree.
Okay.
And then his dad travels back and forth several times. And at one point, he and his mom get pregnant. And so then when mom comes back to move, she brings with her little sister.
Okay.
And he was like, who is this?
Like, what's going on? Yeah.
What is this happening? Who is this
Yeah.
stranger? Which he says, this little brown girl with a mushroom cut. Like, and so it is just that kind of tale over the course of an hour of that experience of growing up. And it just reminded me of like that interruption of, this is how I know my family to work.
I know my role. I know where I fit.
Which homeostasis, that is how the system operates. And then whenever that's interrupted, the system will always try to right itself.
Right.
Usually by overcorrecting.
Right.
Which causes interruption and flow.
Right.
And
yeah, and even as you say that word overcorrecting, I think thinking about Sharu and like his relationship with his brother, that kind of really kind of antagonistic, like trying to get his brother to just like stop, or just being so against, feels somewhat like that overcorrecting, like just straining to get things back to a more peaceful.
Because he seemed to be such a, I don't have a better word, happy kid, and yet so stern with his brother.
Right.
And I think it was this kind of like, can't you just conform?
Right.
What's wrong with you?
These are the rules.
This is how it works.
Right. Like, just assimilate.
Yeah.
Like, get with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me more about, I just want to like sit and listen to you talk about it. I mean,
just about the movie. Yeah. You know, I think, like I said, I have a personal connection to parts of this story, being an immigrant to this country, to a country that's different from home, you know. And so I think watching this movie, there's a part of it that felt comforting for me, of like a portrayal of like what the experience is to like leave home. And I think, you know, moving to more well-developed places, so like going from, you know, India and his experience there to like what Australia kind of is when he moves there, well-developed, like just in all the ways, right? Like more Western. I had that experience. And so home, you know, you hear him being kind of like embarrassed about where he's really from, saying he's from Kolkata or whatever, you know. And I think that it also says so much of like the experience of an immigrant in some ways, is that I think in sometimes in more well-developed countries, like we look at home that's maybe less developed as like, oh, poor you, and like all of these things, you know. And I had some of that experience of what this side of the world thinks about the place that is home for me. But seeing for him, like we see it through kind of like a childlike lens, his experience of just like navigating this world that is like magical and beautiful, and home in more ways than like this, like, yeah, like clean, like well put together life. And so I find a lot of comfort in watching that, just feeling like understood, I think. And like, yeah, like home isn't easy, like life is easy, life is good. You know what I mean? Like home is connectedness and like the place where we feel safe enough to adventure. I mean, it's this little kid who, yeah, like again, I say like kind of living in like poverty and yet feels that secure base to like go and explore and know this many steps and then I'm home to mom. Like even as an adult, right? Like him looking at the map.
There was something in him that seemed like he couldn't comprehend why certain things were so familiar once he got back.
He got there.
Like he was almost like finding something new and something familiar
So
at the same
familiar.
time.
Yes, that's so true. Like his body like knew the way, like just knew, and yet I mean it's 25 years later, and so it is this kind of new discovery from this adult brain, and yet like that 5-year-old self, like,
and probably a different experience because he was such a small child in the context of the movie and such a giant adult.
He's so big.
Like he towers over everybody else that comes around him.
I know.
Like a full head and shoulders.
Yeah, I wonder what that experience was like, you know, because I think in childhood, or I imagine me as a kid, there's so many things that I felt were so grand, you know, and then you return to them and the pile of rocks isn't as big as you thought it was, you know, when you were a kid.
Yeah, I remember, I think maybe the first time that I got to vote, my voting station was at the elementary school I went to.
Okay.
And walking through the hallway of my elementary school as an adult,
Wow.
I thought, this stuff used to be so big.
Like huge.
Like,
Yeah.
what has happened to this?
Yeah.
And my wife is having a similar experience now where her parents are selling the home that she grew up in.
Okay.
And so, and we're traveling back there today, but the last time we were there, her saying, the thing that I love the most about this house is I feel small in it. And that's like a comfort to me. And it's just that familiarity.
Yes.
And I couldn't help but think of, you know, the tough things that he faced as a child, he didn't know were tough.
Exactly.
And they were so familiar to him that there was a comfort in it. And it even seemed like when he was an adult going back and had known, quote unquote, an easy life.
Yeah.
Still finding comfort in that familiarity.
Right.
Like the little, I don't know how to describe it, apartment or, I don't know, shelter that they lived in. When he went up to it, it didn't seem to have a roof.
Right.
Maybe a curtain as an entrance. And when he walks in, you can see this, which, I mean, Dev Patel, geez, you are acting the crap out of like the role here. But you can see this like lowering of the shoulders, this kind of like breath exit his body of, I'm home.
I'm home.
Yeah. And I have a friend I used to work with who immigrated here from Peru and would talk about how, you know, growing up, you know, the home that he lived in had dirt floors and had a cardboard roof. And when it rained, that roof would collapse and they would have to construct it again, you know. But you can see this, you know, even though from the chairs that we sit in now, you know, we can look back at that and go like, oh, that was so tough. There's just something about it to him that was, but that was life. That's what I knew. That was my family. That's what I loved. And we didn't think about it. It was just how things worked.
Right. Yeah. I think, like that breath, like as you did, kind of that breath of relief he feels when he gets home. I think it brings to mind, just the scene when he finally finds it and he's like zooming in on Google Earth And he said at some point, I've been visiting her. He's been in his mind retracing those steps to mom, right? And
Which it seems like he got there on Google Earth by accident.
I
It
don't
looked to
even
me
know
like
how he found
the computer
it.
was near him and he just
He
kind
just,
of
like,
flicked the
zoomed
mouse
in.
with
I
his
know.
finger and it ended up in an area that he hadn't looked at yet, and some kind of memory
Clicked.
triggered in his head and he started zooming in and following a road.
Right. That pathway that he...
And recognizing,
the
and you see him
landmarks.
kind of like flashing back
Mm-hmm.
to moments of, and I, there was something about this movie. Have you seen Rocket Man?
Yes.
That reminded me at the beginning when Elton John is a kid, at the very beginning, and he's in his support group and he starts singing "The Bitch Is Back," and then him as a kid runs out of that room. The way the little kid playing him as a child runs, and he's pumping his arms, and it was the same way that like the child version of him ran in this, and there was this something clicked in me of just this joy of childhood and how you're in a hurry to get everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And how, there are times where as adults, where I'll speak for me, where at least it feels like you're almost trying the opposite. You're almost trying to get places slower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just that joy of childhood, And so when he was following that road and flashing back, it was him running through those places, pumping those little arms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they kind of cut back and forth. And when he gets kind of on the map to home, he says, "Mom." And that same sort of like sigh, right? Like he's reached home, like running so hard, arms pumping, and then "Mom."
Yeah.
And that moment, like, yeah, I think I start crying then, and then I cry for the last 30 minutes of the movie. Like what home is, what mom is, and the longing to get back there. And yeah, like not everyone has that opportunity to like find home in that way, but I think part of what we do as therapists is like, kind of helping clients sit through the emotional Google Maps of like their internal world, right? And find these landmark places that bring things up, bring up memories, messages. And sometimes those are hard things, right? And we keep going, walking that pathway with them until we reach the end. And yeah, like there's lots of tears and heartache on the way. And then hopefully at some point there's this sigh of like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think something that I really appreciated in it was at the end, it didn't seem like that he was choosing which him he was going to be.
Right.
He was instead combining
like
them.
Integrating.
Yes.
And that's like the whole
as an
goal.
ultimate him.
Yes.
Yeah. And I remember early on in my therapy as a client, one of my therapists saying to me, "Oh, you don't know your own story." Mm-hmm. So like our work is going to be you learning your own story.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, what are you,
like, what
you
are
don't
you
get
saying?
to say, you don't get to say that. Like you don't get to say whether or not I know my story.
yeah.
Of course I know my story.
Right.
Like I know my story better than, which as a therapist, I have said to clients, you're the expert on you. Mm-hmm. At that moment on the client's couch, I was thinking, I'm the expert on me, but thinking of it in a different
way,
light. Mm-hmm. But like doing so much work with addiction now, and I've said it on the show before, you've got the 12 steps of addiction. You've also got the 12 promises. And one of the 12 promises, at least the one that always sticks out the most to me, was to be able to look back on your past without feeling shame. And I know that only comes with integration of your story, with acceptance, which integration is such a weird word.
It is.
And I always, I don't want to say I'm a stickler. I have a passion for, words that get tossed about so much without being defined.
Right. Yeah.
So like, I think another word that you could use to work there would just be acceptance and familiarity with your story.
Yeah.
And Richard Rohr in Breathing Underwater defined forgiveness as getting to the place where you no longer want a different or a better past.
Wow.
And that rings true of integration and acceptance, I think as well, of just I don't have to be who I am. To be who I am today doesn't mean I have to sacrifice who I was in the past.
Right. Like reject that.
And reject it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a part of how I became who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think through the work of therapy, going back to explore that can help us become more of who we are today.
Absolutely.
By
like
going back to
your whole
that.
self
Yes.
forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like in this movie, you kind of see that is like, his fear of letting his adoptive mom into what's going on is this wanting to compartmentalize, right? Not wanting to, the need to know about past self, say something about the present self, right? And instead, in the end, it's like, okay, how do we hold all the pieces together as like a fuller version of like you and who you are? And I definitely think like when doing trauma work, I have so many clients who don't want to bring.
It's so scary.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
To bring all of that in and not know, like, how does that interact with this life I've worked so hard to build separate from that, right? And it's this internal battle to also want to maintain homeostasis, right? And this young self is like
intrapersonal homeostasis. Yeah. Within me.
Right.
Yeah. And I completely get that because I have survived this long by rejecting or putting away or denying or isolating or however you want to, term that, what has gone on in the past.
Right.
And, look how far I've come by doing that. Yep. So you're telling me that I need to reach back?
Right. Yeah.
What is that even? That doesn't compute.
That doesn't feel
but I've
like
gotten
the
so
right
far.
Thing. Exactly. Yeah. And personally, that was definitely me. I mean, this, like, doing the program at Trevecca sent me back to therapy. I thought I was okay. And I was. I mean, I was functional.
Functional is a great word for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was working.
Okay being functional.
Yeah. I was, like, totally fine.
All my parts work.
Exactly. I have a job. Like,
I don't get hung up on anything.
Exactly.
Everything fits.
Like, everything's good. I have friends, and so this thought that, like, I need to go hold hands with, like, my past experiences felt useless. Like, for what reason? I'm good.
What a beautiful way to describe that. Hold hands with my past experience.
Yeah.
Joining with your past self.
It's taken a long time to say it that way.
Wow.
But I feel connected to the past experiences in that tender way of holding hands and walking forward together with it, instead of saying, don't make a mess in my life right now, stay quiet. And so my own trauma work was like, oh, okay. What about this thing? And yeah, like, I say that phrase over and over of trauma has symptoms, not memories, and seeing the symptoms that were, like, present in my life. And I feel really similar to Sharu. Like, my symptoms were really quiet. Like, on the surface, I'm that story of, like, look at her, like, she overcame blah, 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 blah. And, have always done well in school and all these things. And, like, yet internally, there was this fracturing that no one could see, right? This running away from the old me. I didn't want anything to do with that. And so I think my own work informs the way that I can be with clients in their work of, like, how do we become friendly with that past stuff and say, like, I've had to put you away for a really long time, but now there's room. There's room, and you're not, they don't have to be against each other, right?
Yeah.
They can hold hands. And
which really, so in my own therapy, there were some interventions that my therapist used that in my work as a therapist now, I have thought back to thinking I would like to use some of those things.
Yeah.
I have since found out where they came from and gotten books. Marilyn Murray, the Murray Method, which is another way of processing trauma.
Okay, I'm not familiar
Trauma
with that.
egg came from her.
Okay, yeah, there's that.
And so in my client work alongside that, my therapist also did what she called a family sculpt, which Dr. Hopkins, when I said something to her one time about it, she was like, that sounds more psychodrama than it does what a real family sculpt is. But I was like, whatever, I don't care what the term is.
Right.
And it reminds me of having Jeremy Lehman on the show talking about Rocket Man too. Part of that work in the family sculpt or the psychodrama was constructing in a room, this was in group therapy, with other people playing family members of mine and somebody playing me as a child in the middle, and then me walking into that scene and sitting down on the bed next to me as a child. Yeah. Oof. And then like speaking to him and giving him what he needed then, which then was teaching me how to do that internally, right. How to give to myself what I needed and still need, because it's not like those childhood needs that you have that went unmet vanish.
Right.
It's not like just because you're 20 years older, those were all, like, you can say those were all met and I'm great.
I'm good now.
Yeah,
right.
There's really like a grieving that those needs didn't get met.
Right.
But as an adult, we can't seek to have childhood needs met as an adult. Those are kind of tied to our childhood. Really, we grieve that those needs weren't met and we discover what our needs are as an adult and we seek to get like those
safe people
through intimacy, through healthy intimacy stuff. And so I think just the beautiful picture that you're painting of holding hands with your past self just brings to mind that visual in my own life. And then Jeremy, even on his episode, described it as there are times where he'll be driving and have a conversation with his younger self. And he said, as he was in therapy, noticing one day that his younger self had grown and he didn't make that happen.
Yeah.
Like he didn't picture, well, now I'm going to picture like you now, instead of an 8-year-old as a 14-year-old, but he just said,
noticing the
he just noticed you are older now. And it is just beautiful. That integrative, beautiful, I am me in every one of these places and locations and eras and people. I am all of these.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
That is really impactful. Yeah. Hilariously, a family sculpt is what sent me to therapy. So I understand that. With
was
Dr.
it
Bradley
in
family therapy at Tribeca? We did that. And I was like, I think I'm not okay, actually. But it was that kind of externalizing what had always kind of internally been true.
You had kept it so safe
inside
like, for so long.
Here,
to see it out there was very confrontational.
Yes. And then I'm like, whoa, there are pieces of me that like I have no clue about.
Yeah. I think that the process of becoming a therapist, which I had already, when I entered into the program, been through 2.5 years of individual work. In the middle of that, 6 months of group, like I'd done a ton of therapy, but like entering into it, you have to
do that,
open yourself up and take a look at parts of yourself again, almost even if you don't want to, because as you're learning it, you naturally like filter through. Yeah, you filter through those things.
Right.
And then of course they do teach you, like if your stuff comes up in a session with a client, like what are you going to do? Right. And you can't let it affect you. And yeah. But like you kind of by nature are filtering all of your stuff through these new things. And so it does bring up new, I don't want to say new stuff, but it certainly shines a different light on the stuff.
Yes.
And I think as you're training to do it, it is a natural thing to go, oh, I need help. And there's not a shame in that because you're training to help people. Well, I can't even say that because there could be a shame in that. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but like,
that's true.
But it is certainly, for me, I was able to recognize at parts, whereas many, many years ago, it was not even, I wouldn't even say I didn't have the ability to think that I needed help.
Yeah.
I didn't have the framework to understand that there was help to be had.
Right.
I just thought, well, I'm supposed to just push this stuff down
Right.
and swallow it and
Like
sit
I'm
on it.
doing the adult thing.
Yeah,
Right? Like
real adults don't.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I even, I don't want to say imagine, but my understanding of therapy as a client was one day I'll graduate. And when I graduate, I will be so well balanced,
Like,
quote
okay,
unquote, that things won't bother me anymore. Like I'll be unaffected. So like tough times will happen and I'll just be able to remain even keeled. I thought I would feel less. And then and I still go back to what my friend Todd said, which he's been my best friend for like 20 years and he's a therapist here in town.
Okay.
And he said, no, what it does is you end up feeling better. It's not like you're happy all the time, but your ability to experience your feelings and process your feelings and listen to your feelings increases. So you feel better, not you feel better.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think in one of my classes, a professor said, when you numb the pain, you numb the joy. And so I think at the end of therapy, I probably felt more than I'd ever felt in all the ways. More joy, more pain. And so, I think there, for me, was this feeling like, okay, I'm going to be more okay than ever. And I think like you're saying, I am more okay than ever, but that also
it's not how I imagined it, though.
Right. It doesn't look like what I thought it would look like at the end. And, you talk about shame and I did a lot of like personal therapy through the program. And then I, graduated and I was done. And I thought like you, like, I'm done, like, great job. And I was like, I'd done a lot of work, And then a few months later, something happened and I was not okay, meaning like I felt feelings about it. And I was like, wait, is that supposed to happen? Like, I thought we were done.
Like, we flushed those things out.
We were done with that.
Yeah.
And it took me such a long time to reach out to my therapist again because I felt such shame about the fact that I was still being impacted by my story. And I remember going to her and she said, she's like, you can come back here for the rest of your life if you need to. And that permission was so disarming to me to know, like, there isn't this like magical graduation thing. Like, yes, I think we have times where we need less or more support, but to know that just because you need support again, that doesn't mean that like you've gone backwards or you're not healing or that you've not moved forward. Yeah. And I think for me, that was really important and a message I try really hard to give to my clients that, yes, like there will be seasons where you feel so good and resolved. And that's a time of just like being in the new place, but hard will always come.
Yeah, you're not stronger during those times and weaker during tough times.
Right.
You're the same person throughout.
Right.
But life is always going to bring with it new challenges. And sometimes, if you want to look at it in a totally utilitarian way, sometimes we have the tools to deal with some challenges to where they don't affect us as much. Sometimes we need new tools. Sometimes we need help understanding and processing and tackling something because we haven't had experience with it before.
Right.
So for me to face the same challenges that I have in the past, I know how to deal with those now. I've made it through, and I mean, to a better extent because of the therapy that I've had. I have even gone back and revisited some of those and learned how to process them better. But when a new challenge occurs, sometimes the tools I have are good enough to tackle that.
Right.
And sometimes I need tools that I've never used before.
Right. Yeah, I think there's, doors inside of all of us that like continue to open as we go. And the things that life brings, like, knock on those doors in different ways. And sometimes, we know how to be with those things, and other times like it's a new place. And yeah, like I don't think that means we didn't do a good enough job the first time around or whatever, you know, but
we continue to explore the world. We continue to explore ourselves.
Right.
There's parts of me now, like I'm turning 39 in a couple of weeks, and there's parts of me I still don't know.
Right.
I'm still getting to know me. It's not like when Freud was like, yeah, you're done cooking when you're 8 years old. Yeah. You know, it was his daughter and Erickson that were like, no, it's like it takes the whole time.
Forever. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole time you're a person, you're still in the oven, you're still developing.
Right.
And so because of that, like, and then even as new relationships come, it's like it holds up new mirrors, you know? And so it's just this constantly evolving process of me getting to know me. Right. And so I've got, you know, new outer challenges and new inner challenges as I confront those outer ones. Right. And throughout all of that, you know, one thing I tell my clients is you've always got a seat on this couch, even if the couch is different. If I get a new couch, like a new place, you've always, so like, if you feel like I've gotten what I need to get from my therapy, then, I mean, we're going to jump up and down and high five and celebrate, but you've always like same email, same phone number. You just reach out. You're always welcome. You don't ever have to wonder, can I go back? Is it okay? Right. It's always okay. Right. Just assume that. Yes. I will always make a spot for you, you know, even if it means if I normally leave at 5, staying till 6, like whatever it means, you'll have a spot. Space here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know, as you say that, like, I'm just like, I think there are moments where I'm like overwhelmed by what like a privilege this job is. Like, we've talked so much about like attachment and all of that, and even that idea that part of what we are for a season or whatever is that secure base, right? That knowing like I can call Josh, or I can book an appointment with Josh or Mimi, and there'll be space there for me and a place to return to. I think, yeah, like I just feel like, whoa, like we get to do something really cool, you know, and sometimes we're the first secure base that another human being has ever had, you know, and that floors me, you know, like it's just.
It's a real honor. And like, I look at it as, I'm so honored. I really want to steward the relationship and your story well. And so because of that, I want to work hard at keeping my boundaries, but at also being fully engaged and being fully with you, and modeling, you know, grace, but also being in my full feelings. And so if I'm in a session and I feel scared, to say I feel scared. If I feel hurt, to say I feel hurt, to be fully authentically who I am,
like another human being.
Yeah, like which kind of leads to, I even said to Leigh-Ann, you know, last night, if I ever do merch for the show, this is going to be on the merch. It'll be the first thing, because it's something that I think manifested itself, conceptualized itself in my life, and it's something that I give to every client. It's just, oh, you've got a bad case of being a person.
That's good.
You know, and it's just to say that no matter what you're going through, if you experience shame is always going to try to isolate you and tell you you're the only one. Nobody will ever know what it's like. Nobody can ever understand. And on top of that, then you get to the stuff like, well, a real adult wouldn't. Or a real man wouldn't, or a real woman wouldn't. Or, and it's going to try to cut you off. But the more that I was in my own therapy, the more that I practice as a therapist, what I realize is we all have all the feelings. And even if we walk through the same airport door as another person and our backstories were completely different, we all have joys, we all have pain, we all have fears. And I think if we can sit with another person and just ask questions and listen, I think there's a natural connection that can happen. And what we find is that even if the plot to our stories are different, we all have similar beats.
Like we can, yeah.
We
Like
can find
relate
those
to
moments of
joy,
connection and
pain.
relation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so
Mm-hmm.
we've all just got a bad case of being a person,
Mm-hmm.
and it's terminal. I mean, we're
Yeah,
we're gonna die as a person,
forever.
but it's
Yeah.
just kind of this, um, we will find what we're looking for. And so if we look for ways that we connect instead of ways that we're different,
We're different, yeah.
then we're
Yeah.
going to find them.
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, what we want isn't someone who can say, I get exactly what that's like because I've walked through the exact same thing, right? Like, I think at the heart of it, what we want is just another person to like sit there in an engaged way and hear us
Mm-hmm.
and say, and yeah, just be connected to our experience more so than that they understand exactly. Because that's like you're saying, it's not possible, right? I think about two siblings growing up in the same home. Even their stories of like that experience will be completely different. So there's not really ever a way to say like I fully get what you're saying.
Like
right?
Sharu and his brother.
Exactly.
They
So different. If they told the stories of being in that adoptive home, they would have completely different narratives. And so that can't be the goal, right? To say to people like, I need you to understand exactly what I've been through. But it's that like response of human connection in the midst of pain that I think is the true longing that we all have.
Yeah. I was thinking, as you were saying that, back to something you said earlier about trauma with a capital or a little t.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something even about, as you said that hit me a little weird,
Mm-hmm.
just because what may be traumatic to one person may not be to another.
Agreed.
And the only person that gets to decide it is that person.
Is you, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, what could traumatize one person to where they're asking for help and seeking help processing and stuff may have rolled off another's back.
Totally.
Neither person is more strong
like
or more weak than the other. Neither person is
No.
more, more adult or more balanced or whatever.
Like sounder in mind or
Sure,
whatever.
sure.
Healthier, all those
But
things.
the individual gets to decide, and I know that there's times even in our work where maybe the individual doesn't realize that it was traumatic. And so to be walking into and through their story with them, sometimes to give them the language to understand. And there's been times where I've even seen clients, it's almost like a release of, I've been trying to tell myself a version of this story for so long. To have somebody say, oh no, that's not what was supposed to have happened.
Yeah,
that
wasn't okay.
Yeah.
All of those things, yeah.
It's like it gives them permission
absolutely
to fully feel.
Like explore it, just be in it. Yeah, I have a client right now who said to me, as we, were doing work, it was, I think after our second session, she said, I thought I was going to have to walk in here and prove that I'd been through something hard. And that, I've carried that with me because, the weight of that, to have pain and feel like I have to prove that it's real. And so, in the space of therapy, there's nothing she had to prove, right? I believe her and, her experience is real. And she told me, how different that was than, her existence. And that's the goal. I always want you to have, a new experience in therapy.
And it was probably so healing to have a person hear that and just immediately accept and run with it.
Right.
And be there.
Right.
She was probably thinking, all right, 5 sessions in, she'll start listening to me.
Right.
Or something like that. And so just to have you meet her with compassion and acceptance and no, this is your place.
Right. Your experience
I believe
is real.
you.
I do believe you. You have been through something really hard. And that's such a gift. And I think ultimately, what we all long for when we're bringing pain is not to be poked at or have to prove it or spin it in a way that makes it sound like it really was bad enough to be considered big T or little t or whatever. Because, yeah, like I say that, but I don't really care about that. Like, as you're saying, like if it's trauma, if it's traumatic for you, if it caused pain and harm, that's all I care about.
Yeah.
You know?
Last week's guest, Shelby, we did the movie Elf. She said something that has stuck with me. She said to be your authentic self is to be vulnerable. Like you can't be authentically you and not be vulnerable because you're bringing the reality of who you are in a way that somebody is always going to have the ability to say, I reject that.
Right. To judge it, to push it away.
Which is vulnerability. It's being willing to risk, you know, and still show up.
Right.
And, you know, that sounds like the client that you were just talking about. It sounds like any client that walks into our door.
It's a huge risk, right?
It's us. It's those of us who, and this is how I describe myself to my clients. You know, I'm the guy who has done more work than you because I got started before you. It's not because I'm better or because I have a better handle on it. It's just because I'm 10 miles down the road, but I'm turning back, waving my hand saying this way, you know, this is the way to healing. This is the way to integration. This is the way to hope. But I don't have it
like figured out together or whatever. All those things.
I'm in the process of figuring it out.
Sure.
You know,
and will be forever, you know?
I'm just a couple of hallways down. I want to ask you something and no, you don't have to answer it and we can always take it out.
Okay.
You know, you talked about how this movie had so many moments that kind of touched places in your journey. Have you thought about going back? Have you had a chance to go back?
Yeah. So, I, you know, I'm in the process of working on citizenship here. And so moved here under political asylum, and so haven't been able to go back in the years that I've been here. And so I'm hoping that next year will be the year. And even watching this movie last night just felt like, like part of me is like terrified of like what it will mean to touch soil that's like home and has so much memory built into just like the land, you know, like your feet touching earth that is like home earth, you know? And so, it excites me and scares me for my eventual pilgrimage back home too. And so, I'm hoping next year will be the year.
Wow.
And so that will be, I was 12 when I moved here. So I haven't been back in 18 years.
Wow.
And so, like that, I think that is why like watching this movie feels so like oddly like out of body in some ways. It's like I'm anticipating my own sort of like emotional catharsis.
Well, it sounds like it is simultaneously this window to the past and also a window to the future.
That's such a good way. Like I have chills when you say that because I think that is it. Like I'm kind of standing there watching both kind of merge together. Like I'm going back into myself, but also that hasn't like it's in the future. It's just very bizarre. So
I know that anytime I have stood on the precipice of doing something big in my life, I have felt terrified and excited at the same time. And so I just, and while I have never done anything remotely similar to that, you know, it sounds like that is the coupling of feelings that is appropriate. And while I can't imagine what that will be like I will just cheer for you, the whole way. And, you know, afterwards would love to hear about it.
Absolutely.
I am just so incredibly floored by getting a chance to hear about this movie from you and how personal it is and just how the movie by itself is beautiful and powerful,
Yes.
but to hear you talk about it is a tremendous honor. And
Thank you.
I'm so just humbled and honored that you would trust me to have it on the show. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about in your work,
Yes.
something that your clients have taught you.
Yeah. Clients have taught me a lot, you know. I think that my clients have taught me about the cost of healing. And that probably sounds strange, you know, because I think we think about healing as this movement toward hope and connection. And it is. Like, I fully believe that. I've experienced that, and I'm so grateful for that. But then there's this cost to healing that's, that means that we relate to old, like, people who knew us before our healing in different ways, and sometimes there isn't space for our more integrated
It's interrupting
self.
that homeostasis.
Exactly. And sometimes those places can't adjust or will not adjust to make room for the way that you're functioning in a new way. And so just as much as I hold space for like the joys and the connection that and the hope that comes from healing, I think my clients have taught me to honor that there's a very real cost in most cases when people choose to embark on this journey. And so, like I think, and I've experienced that personally, but I think watching it happen in front of me and seeing that like sometimes healing invites more grief, right? As we feel more integrated and hopeful, but kind of bumping up against the places that reject that and brings this new wave of healing, of grief that we have to kind of sit with, of feeling like, man, there's more loss, kind of, even though I feel better, I feel hopeful, I feel more connected, and yet not everyone
We'll welcome that.
will welcome that version of you. And so, my clients have taught me to be more balanced in understanding, like how beautiful this is and how hard it is to, you know?
Yeah. I think about, I tell clients at the beginning, I can't promise you any results because that's not up to me.
Right.
What I can promise you is that if change happens, it will bring more work because not everybody will be happy about the change.
Right.
You would think that you're coming in here to tackle tough stuff and
Right.
people would just be
like,
fist pumping
hooray.
and, confetti and all of that. But,
Right.
but sometimes people are able to be who they are because of who you were.
Right.
And so when you change who you were, it means that they have to change who they are.
Right.
And you're the one in therapy. So you're the one who has agreed to doing that work.
Yeah, so, and readiness happens at such different paces.
It will invite them to their own work, and some will be willing.
And some
won't.
Right.
And so we will have to grieve some
and
losses.
That rejection doesn't mean that you aren't doing good work.
Yeah.
Because I think it can feel like that when we go to our families out of change and the system is so disrupted that we feel on the outside. We can feel like, like we can question the work that we've done, or clients can do that. And so to kind of hold this new grief while also continuing to like stand in the new place that you're in, I think is, creates more work, as you're saying, and can feel costly in some ways,
Yeah. There's so many things that you've said today I just have thought were so beautiful. The cost of healing. It does cost. Yeah, but it also, it's so worth it.
It is. I fully believe that. Like, I think even in the midst of that cost, like being able to be in life as like a more integrated person is like the most beautiful gift in the world. And I feel that and have experienced that, but one doesn't take away from the other either, right? Like that like the beautiful benefit of healing doesn't like diminish the cost or make it hurt less. And that's another place to hold hands, right? Is that
that's
you
part of
can
the
be
growth,
in
is being able to
both.
feel both,
Right.
instead of having to choose. Well, I
Right.
can either feel joy or I can
Right.
feel sadness. I
Right.
can't have,
Both.
yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation
Yeah.
today and
Mm-hmm.
they just feel like that you would be a person they feel they could connect with and they would
Mm-hmm.
love to see you as a client. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the easiest place to find me and information about me is my website. So it's mimimungomba.com. So I'll spell that because my last name is a little tricky. So it's MIMIMUNGOMBA.com. And on there, my phone number's on there, my email's on there, information about where I practice, the way that I practice, all of that is on there. So that's probably the easiest place to get a hold
And
of
I'll throw it in the
me.
show notes too. So like if
Okay,
you're listening in the
perfect.
podcast app, just swipe up a little bit and it'll
Okay.
be right it'll be
Perfect.
right there spelled out. You can just click on it.
Perfect.
Mimi, thank you so much for coming today
Thank you so
and
much for having me.
just sharing your experience and your story and your wisdom. And I have no doubt that it's going to be very, very helpful for people.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Fun.
Hi, my love.
Hey,
How in the world are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering
hmm
if you could share with me your thoughts on the movie and the episode.
Oh boy. The movie, first of all, is phenomenal. Hopefully, at this point, everybody has actually watched it because you instructed them to do so at the beginning of the episode. Yeah, super good, really powerful. That's all. That's all that I have to say on the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then for the episode, which I think what a cool and perfect combo of a movie and a guest. I think hearing Mimi's take on it and also just the little bit of her experience, and yeah, I don't know, I just found it to be really insightful and helpful and powerful and just a cool episode. I think one of the biggest like I don't know how to, one of the biggest like takeaways I guess that I had is how much she talked about and emphasized like human connection in the movie, and that being I mean I don't think I would have like picked that out, I guess, if that makes sense. And she just emphasized it and almost, it was almost like she took a highlighter and pointed out all of these things in the movie that showed how important human connection is and how that, yeah, like just how powerful it was for Sharu.
Yeah, I when I was writing the intro to the episode today, I couldn't remember if we used the words protective factors. But I would call,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I would call Saru's relationship with his mom and brother a protective factor.
Yeah.
Just because I think, here you see this young boy living in, what we would call poverty
Mm-hmm.
in our neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And yet his mother and his brother smiling ear to ear, loving each other, having everything that they needed. And that stemming from the relationship that they had with each other. It was just a beautiful thing. And I think that definitely built resilience into him.
Yeah. Oh, totally. For me, I think like when you guys talked about that, it made me think of this like topic / concept that's going around a lot, like the white savior concept. And I've seen and read several stories or articles or like just people telling their stories about adoption, and specifically, adopting kids from maybe under-resourced countries or areas. And I had such an emotional journey watching this, but I think when you guys talked about that, it brought up the feeling in me of like, how dare we look down on his life? Like how dare anybody say to themselves, oh, well, that child is suffering and I need to save them? Because we saw played out the loving attachment connections that he had. And like, he had a loving family and has joy and he plays. And I don't at all, I mean, there might've been some food security things, and I don't mean to minimize that or, you know, minimize trauma that he might've had if he stayed with his family. But it definitely brought up in me like, yes, like this is why there's not a better or worse or like, you know, I don't know. I just think people can sometimes look down on in like a very not strengths based or like, positive, you know, way on people who are in different cultures or different countries or different situations. And I thought this was a good example of like, no, I was rooting for him to go back to his mom the whole time. I was rooting for him to go back to his home, you know, when he was a kid and he was lost and he was wandering. And even when the adults finally found him, I thought, why can't anybody just listen to the city that he's saying? Like, why isn't anybody just returning him to his mom? Cause that's what I wanted to happen.
I don't think they spoke the same.
No. And he was saying, we found out later he was not saying it,
it
correctly,
brings to mind again the quote from Life Animated and its trailer that has stuck with me since the first time I saw it because it just hit me so hard. Who gets to determine what a meaningful life is?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, there are, as you're saying, so many of us who are so ready to look at others and with the best of intentions say, let me swoop down and carry you to something better, metaphorically and literally, when that's not our job, that's not our responsibility. And it's not asked for.
And it's
a lot
not
of times.
necessary. Yeah.
It's not asked for a lot of times. So yeah, good call.
Let's see. So I think in talking about trauma, which, oh my gosh, I just loved hearing her talk about trauma. That was so informative and insightful and wonderful. And I loved that she said it could be a big T or a little T. And I really like that. Like she brought up, you know, it doesn't matter. Like she brought up the fact that different things can traumatize different people and trauma looks different in every person. So like we did a training for our mentors a while ago that had a lot, we spent a lot of time on that subject and like explaining that there's all these symptoms of trauma. There's emotional, there's physical, there's mental, like there's all these different ways that trauma plays out, but it plays out in different and in varying, you know, severity, like in varying degrees for every single person. And you guys talked more about this at the end too. Like one thing that might, you know, big T traumatize someone might impact another person totally different, depending on maybe protective factors or their coping skills that they have, or also just like biological factors. Like it can affect everybody different ways. And I think I am someone like I play the minimizing game a lot with myself. Like I have done that, you know, that shouldn't have been a trauma for me, or that shouldn't have affected me in this way, because I know that there's people who have really big T traumas. So I just found it really helpful and welcoming and inviting that she highlighted that, you know, that she emphasized that there's not I don't know, there's not a more or less deserving trauma to heal and to focus on. Yeah, I was thankful for that.
That brings back, you know, my talk with Shelby about ELF, like to be your authentic self is to be vulnerable. And I think to talk about something that was traumatic is both of those things. Even if you're trying to tell yourself, no, that wasn't, I'm okay, I should be okay. You know, part of showing up to the party is maybe admitting that you're not.
Yeah, totally. And then I think sort of on the same subject as what I was saying earlier, but I just have like, it was just really tough to see him getting adopted into his new family for me. I wanted to stand up and yell, he has a family. He already has a family. And so that was really interesting. I think the movie does a good job of depicting, and I'm going to not say the movie because this is a person's life. Like, this was based off of a person's life. I just am really glad that he chose to share it, and because I feel like that's really important. And then of course by the end, like, he calls his adoptive mom and says, like, I found my mom, but like, you're still, like, you're my mother. Like, it doesn't discount all these years.
It doesn't change who you are to me.
Yeah. And I don't know. That is complex. That is super complex.
The real footage
Yeah.
that ran during the credits of him taking his adoptive mom to the village where his biological mom lived, and the two of them meeting and hugging, was just, ugh.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing that I had written down was, you guys used the words integration and assimilation a lot. And so I wanted to look up the definitions and talk about those, because I remember at some point in my world, I learned the difference in those two things, and then it became important for me to like use them in different ways. So, integrate is defined as to combine one thing with another so that they become a whole. Yeah, it's a lot of combining two things to form a whole. Bring people or groups with particular characteristic or needs into equal participation in membership in or membership of a social group or institution. Did that last definition make sense?
No.
So to bring, I'm just going to say people, to bring people into equal participation in or membership of a social group or institution.
That's assimilation.
No, that's integration.
Okay.
Assimilation is the process of taking in and fully understanding information or ideas, or no, that's about food. The process of becoming similar to something. So the distinction in those two things is that assimilation is, I assimilate in, like, so in the example of somebody who immigrates, I assimilate into the culture. I adopt all of this new culture and I lose mine. And then integration being, I keep and hold on to, my culture while also kind of marrying it with this new culture. And those two things are integrated and live in harmony and as one. So I think I remember when that distinction was made for me. And I think I thought, because you guys used those words, it might be a good chance to define those and kind of think about even the ways that, because Saru was adopted into an Australian family, and two Australian parents. And of course, like, he was so young, he didn't have much of a chance to hold on to his culture, like his birth home culture. And I thought it kind of showed that when he becomes friends with these other people in college, who it seems like are from the same region, because he goes to their house and they have this food and he sees the little, oh no, I'm not going to remember the name of it.
They were kind of pastry.
Yeah. And he sees that and it kind of sparks like a memory. So I just wonder,
that's the first time he said, I'm not from Calcutta, I'm lost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a really good depiction of, like, he had, I guess, assimilated, and as he kind of was surrounded by and reintroduced to, his culture, it brought up memories. Like, it, he was reminded of it, of his home. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were talking about integration and even said at the end, he didn't have to choose between his past self and his present self. He could be both. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing, I think, just at the end, and I loved when you guys had this conversation about going to therapy and that being like an ongoing journey, and something that it's okay to go back to. It's a resource that you can always have. And in the middle of that, you were talking about how, with your like as an example with your journey in therapy, you got tools to handle the challenges that you were facing, and that, you know, when new challenges come up, and if maybe your tools work for that and maybe they don't, and if they don't, then like going to get support is a good thing. And all of that was great. I just wanted to add in too, like, even if you've gotten tools to face challenges that you've always faced, and then one day for whatever reason, like you still just need extra support. And so it's not a new challenge. It's just still the same challenge. That's okay too. Like, it's always okay to ask for support. And I think therapy is such a good resource in that way. Like, it's a person who their job is to be on your team and, you know, like to create space in a room for you to process what's going on. So I don't know, just wanted to throw in an extra, like, there's no bad time. There's no, you know, there's nothing wrong with going back and leaning on that for support.
Yeah, there's no such thing as I should have this licked by now.
Ooh, yes.
No such thing. So I know my answer on this, but I want to ask yours. Lion, buy, rent, or pass?
Buy, for sure.
Yeah, that's a definite buy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be safe to buy it before you watch it.
I agree.
And then just have it and watch it forever,
yeah,
all the time. Like, maybe even in the way that Casey Neistat has Godfather constantly playing on loop in his office. Maybe I'll just put Lion constantly playing on. No?
Why would you do that to yourself?
It's so cool.
You would be crying all the time.
I know. Did you hear me say, like, third full on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like the shakes.
Yeah.
Well, I loved this movie. I loved this interview. This was just amazing. And I think it's time for us to eat dinner.
Yes, I agree.
So, let's go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say for this week, the theater is closed.